How much would you spend on a controller? 50, 60 bucks? What about $200? The Scuf Vantage controller is packed full of features like back paddles, side buttons, and tons of customization. But all of those features don't come cheap. But what about something cheaper? More like $25. The EasySMX controller is just that. It's a cheap build with no fancy features. I tried both of these controllers to find out if the Scuf Vantage is really 8 times better than the EasySMX.
So right off the bat, it feels a lot better than I expected. It has a decent weight to it, which will only get a little bit heavier when there are actually batteries installed. It feels a little bit smaller than I'd like. So this controller, it is wireless, but it doesn't use Bluetooth. The dongle's honestly bigger than I was expecting. It wouldn't matter if it was plugged into like a desktop PC, but on a laptop, they might look pretty silly. So next up is the Scuf Vantage controller. It's a super large box. I mean, compared to the EasySMX box, the difference is pretty substantial. So this controller has a ton of features. Some of those extras include these 4 bottom paddles you can see down here, as well as these side sax buttons. This one feels way sturdier than the EasySMX. That one almost felt hollow. This feels like there's some weight to it. You can't really take this controller in its first iteration because you can change a lot of this out to exactly what you want it to be. It can work over either Bluetooth, or if you want the lowest latency possible with this controller, you do have the option to use a wired connection. I do like that it's an internal battery. You don't have to worry about always having AA's or switching out AA's, but there's actually a lot more included in this box. So you have different thumbsticks, you also have the longer triggers, you could easily swap these in. We're going to test both these controllers out to see how the $200 Scuf Vantage compares to the $25 EasySMX wireless controller.
So after using these controllers for a while, I got a pretty good idea about how they compared. And honestly, the results surprised me.
This controller is really good, but it's not perfect. And I almost expect it to be at this price point. I really love the customization of this controller. You have so many options, and it was a lot of fun trying out each of the different control sticks and just seeing what I could do for each game. In Sekiro, for example, I tried to remap things like one of the bottom paddles to using an item, so I could easily heal while still controlling the camera with my right thumb. But it still didn't feel super necessary. When I was playing the game normally with the EasySMX, for example, I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. And the innermost paddles are actually really difficult to press, and I didn't end up using them at all. But with all of these added features, I'm still not sure if it's worth $200. So now onto the cheaper controller, the EasySMX. It feels like it's worth $25, but not much more. The EasySMX controller gets the job done with literally no bells or whistles at all. This controller does feel kind of cheap, like it would probably break if you dropped it. I don't think it would survive as long as the Scuf would. But you kind of get used to that. At least I did after half an hour to an hour of using it. Although I will say that for a little less money, if you don't need wireless, you're almost better off going with the wired option of this controller because you don't have this giant battery pack. I can ignore it a little bit, but every so often, if I adjust my grip, you can just kind of feel it between your fingers. But this is only part of the picture. There are a lot of game genres that I just don't play, so I asked 2 of my coworkers to check these out.
So yeah, when I first picked up the EasySMX, it clearly was an Xbox 360 knockoff. Even within that, it doesn't have all the features of an Xbox 360 controller. It doesn't have the headphone jack. It still relies on AA batteries, and you need a wireless dongle to pair it. I just want to point out, for the sake of it, I think this controller actually has a better D-pad than the original Xbox 360 one because that one was terrible, and they should still be ashamed. For the sake of accessibility, it's good that the Scuf has all of these modular options, but I don't know that the average person would be able to make use of all the different settings that there are.
I liked using it for Apex Legends, but it has like these huge other problems where, for instance, aiming is floaty and inconsistent, and that's kind of something huge if you're playing a first-person shooter.
It's hard to understand the value of the Scuf controller at $200. If they both work, there's essentially no way that one is going to be 8 times more valuable because they're accomplishing mostly the same thing. things.
In general, I didn't have any issues with the Scuf, but I will say occasionally when I was switching out the thumbsticks, if I didn't press down one of them all the way, it would almost stick and it wouldn't pop back into place. Like that. It's something like this is really not something you want to see on a $200 controller. There were also little things like changing out the triggers. You almost feel like you're going to break something. When you're spending so much money on a controller, I would be apprehensive to just yank these off all the time and switch them out. I should note, there were some firmware issues with the Scuf Vantage that was reported at launch, but most of that seems to have been fixed in a firmware update released a couple months ago. In terms of connectivity, they both paired easily, and there wasn't any noticeable latency or lag. I think the buttons on the EasySMX controller are fine, but not very good. And it feels like the triggers have a lot of distance to travel before they're actually pressed down. Also, L1 and R1 are super clicky. The EasySMX controller has really smooth thumbsticks, and it's a very stark contrast between the Scuf Vantage controller, which has extremely grippy thumbsticks. The D-pad on the Scuf Vantage controller feels way better than the EasySMX. In terms of unique or standout features, the EasySMX doesn't really have any. It's got a turbo button. That's its one different feature. The Scuf, on the other hand, is all about the customization. You could spend more time customizing this controller than playing games with it. But all this customization and all these unique features are only useful if you will actually use them. For context, I bought my PS4 for $200. It seems kind of hard to justify a controller when you could spend the same amount of money and get an entire console that also comes with a controller. If you pick up one and then you pick up the other, you can tell that there's a huge difference in quality and the EasySMX feels a lot cheaper. But if you play with one of them for a little while, that kind of goes away. So without considering the price, the Scuf wins hands down. But if I was shopping for a controller, I'd pick the EasySMX, not the Scuf.
Do you remember when Homer made a car? Homer made a car on The Simpsons and it just had like everything. Like it just had like a bunch of nonsense and it was more or less just like a bunch of innovation for the sake of innovation, but wasn't very good at being a car. I feel like the Vantage is that.